Hello, everyone. Welcome to Living One. I'm your host, Olivia Crossman. Living One is Kerulos's monthly webinar series, now in its 5th year. With guest speakers from around the world, we listen in to how people are bringing their ethics, minds, and lives into alignment with nature for earth and animal liberation and revitalization. We ask the question, we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? This year, in collaboration with the Plant Initiative, we start off with a special series, Plant Voices, Guides to Understanding Nonviolent Living. Today and through the month of May, we hear 5 speakers reflect on what plants can teach us about nonviolent living, how plant sentience affects and informs plant-based living, and ways to model and maintain nature nonviolence as plant-based consumers. Today, we have the 3rd session in this series. Our guest today is László Nemes, a Hungarian philosopher, bioethicist, philosophical practitioner living in Budapest, Hungary. He holds a PhD degree in philosophy, and his work integrates bioethics, environmental, and medical humanities with philosophical practice. Over the past 15 years, he has organized more than 500 public philosophy events, philosophical cafés, including philosophy gardens, death cafés, bioethics cafés, philosophy reading groups, including one held at a community psychiatry center in Budapest. In addition, he has published numerous papers on community philosophy, philosophy with children, and philosophical practice. László teaches bioethics and medical humanities in the Institute of Behavioral Sciences in Budapest, as well as in the public arena, where he promotes philosophical ideas via public forums, radios, podcasts, and other media. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various different Indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Kerulos Center for Nonviolence is located on the homelands of the grizzly bear, takelma, daku betete, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. László will be speaking for about 45 minutes, after which we will have 15 minutes for questions and answers. Please keep your microphone muted to avoid any unintended interruptions. If you have any questions for László, please type them into the chat and we will read them out after the presentation. This Zoom session will be recorded, so please make sure to leave your camera off or change your Zoom name if you would like. Finally, we ask that all of us participate with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to foster. So without further ado, we welcome László Nemes.
Yes, thank you very much. It is a great pleasure for me to join this wonderful series of events, these conversations on plant voices and nonviolent living. I have different plans in my mind to share the screen and to present a PowerPoint presentation, some pictures and some thoughts on it. We can start with that, right? I will try to do that. Can you see the presentation? Not in this form.
Looks
And
great.
the steps.
Yes.
Yes, the next one. Okay, so this is the title of my presentation and this project, Garden Philosophy and How to Think Like a Garden. When I talk about this garden philosophy is not about that otherwise very interesting, quickly growing field of philosophy of garden or philosophy of gardening. This is a garden philosophy as a new form or a special form of community philosophy, public discussion groups, very similar to the so-called philosophical cafe, or the Socrates cafe, as it is sometimes called in the United States by Christopher Phillips, coined this term. How to think like a garden. This second part of the title refers to partly plants. It's about plant thinking, but it is important to see that garden is not just about plants, not individual plants or plant species, but it is always a multi-species community, a very interesting one, which includes not just plants and certain animals, but human beings too. Some words about myself. Surely I used to be an ordinary philosopher. regular one, you know, the type, studying philosophy, reading texts, old texts and new texts, articles and books, and going to conferences and try to publish other articles and even some books and teaching and so on. So this is the usual work of a philosopher today. But at a certain point of my life and career, I had some bad feelings about this, and I felt some appointedness, dissatisfaction with this kind of philosophy. And I thought that it should be more to philosophy than just teaching and research. So I tried to go back to my original motivation to become a philosopher and to find new routes to find people and to talk about philosophically interesting questions with virtually everyone, right? And this was the point when I began to organize public philosophy events, group events. First, the usual reading groups for other philosophers, and then the so-called philosophical cafe, which is an international movement from 1992, when the first philosophical cafe was organized in Paris, whereas, of course, the city of not just lights, but the coffee houses, the traditional cafes, and philosophy and philosophers. So this was the idea, to give back, give philosophy back to people, and to reanimate these traditional cafes in Paris and other cities. So this became quickly an international movement, and I later joined this around 2009, maybe. That is for 15 years. And I will, okay, about my professional interests. It was basically revolves around questions of biology and the philosophical aspects of biology, that is the so-called philosophy of biology, and philosophical aspects of cognitive science, which were flourishing in the 1990s and these early years of this new millennium worldwide, or in Hungary too. So I became interested in these questions of biology. And so I became a bioethics teacher at a medical school, and I'm still teach bioethics and medical humanities and even environmental humanities. So I'm interested in biological questions. However, I just recently recognized and how deeply and seriously was guilty of the so-called plant blindness. So I was always, from my early childhood, was surrounded by different animals, you know, say birds, for example, fish, and say certain rodents, golden hamsters, and later cats, dogs, and other animals. Actually, my hero was Konrad Lorenz, the Austrian ethologist, you know, the founder of this field, who won a Nobel Prize in 1973. And Lorenz was extremely popular in Hungary that time, and even still among even young people. And he was widely regarded as one of the greatest scientists of all time. Right? In Hungary, for example, it was the dream of many young people to become an ethologist, to work with animals, but not plants. Plant is a new thing in my interest, so shame on me. I was unable to recognize the presence and the importance of plants. And I could say that it would be more precise to say that I was a victim of this plant blindness, because other people were not able, very similarly, there's this whole field of the philosophy of biology, to recognize the importance of plants until recently, or fungi similarly. So I began to organize this kind of public philosophy events. within what is called as a philosophical practice or community philosophy. And at the same time, I was still interested in questions about nature, about animals, and so recently on the world of plants. Right. I will show some pictures about the series of pictures about my activities in different places, different cities, with different people, with different backgrounds, philosophical cafés mainly. And some Death Cafe is a similarly interesting international movement to provide people this opportunity to gather and to talk about death-related questions quite openly in a philosophical way. So these are the pictures from Debrecen, where I was living and working previously, and from Budapest, you can see the basic characteristics of these conversations. The Death Cafe, for example, so even including some reading groups or bioethics cafes, even at some festivals, for example, for young people in different parts of the country.
Laszlo, sorry to interrupt. If you want to put your presentation in full screen, it might be easier for us to see what you're referring to.
You cannot see the big pictures moving?
No, we're just seeing the garden philosophy.
Oh. Yes, okay. This is the first one, and garden philosophy will be the next point, of course. That my point was that the garden is the new cafe. This was my idea, that instead of using a cafe as a model, I changed my mind and turned my attention to the garden. So actually, we were invited. This was the first step, that this philosophical cafe was invited by a community garden in downtown Budapest to organize very similar events to invite people, regardless of their backgrounds, to talk about philosophical questions. So I introduced at this conference, and later I published this enterprise or this project in a paper with this title. The garden is the new cafe, with vegetal metaphysics and the community philosophy in this journal, Interdisciplinary Research in Counseling, Ethics and Philosophy. So I introduce in this paper my new project in philosophical practice and community philosophy, which can be called as garden philosophy or philosophy in the garden. In a sense, it is virtually nothing but the usual philosophical cafe in the public group philosophy discussion as we mainly know it, in a rather unusual environment, in a garden, in a public community garden. These philosophical activities, for me, are not just entertaining meetings and conversations with certain therapeutic effects, but alternative ways of doing philosophy based on different theoretical foundations or metaphysics. They are my philosophical experimentations with philosophy, as I often say. The common feature of any kind of philosophical practice is that they are always based on interpersonal relations, both in the case of the dialogical way of philosophical counseling and the group philosophy discussions like the philosophical coffee or philosophy with children. The interconnected of minds is the essence of philosophical practice. It is not about acquiring certain knowledge about philosophy, but the very process of doing philosophy together. In this sense, and this will be my idea about what can we or could learn from what can we learn from the plants or the garden world, that how these minds can be interconnected, entangled, and this is the main message. What I am talking about is not certain knowledge about plants or these newly discovered characteristics of plants, plant cognition, plant communication, even plant consciousness, but how can we change our thinking in this way to think very similarly to that of the plants or even the garden, this multi-species community. in this sense, one of the primary goals of dialogical and group philosophy is dissolving personal autonomy to overcome it in order to create a higher order agency of thinking together, the so-called community of inquiry, or the intersubjects, David Kennedy's term, or a group mind with emergent properties. So it is not just the addition of individual minds, this community of inquiry, but a new level of thinking, a new quality with new qualities. In short, in most cases, the philosophical practice, we do not think independently. We suspend our individuality, connect our minds to other people, we know them or not, to achieve a unique quality of philosophizing in the cafés and no in the garden. So this is the place where I organize for 2 years on a monthly basis these kind of garden philosophy events. This is the so-called Kisdiófa közössége. This is the name of the street, and this is the beginning of this garden. You can see so this arrangement of certain small allotments and the plants, and the people know in these garden philosophy events. And more people came, especially during the summertime. The summer evening were very attractive for some people to come and to talk about interesting questions. And it's still continuing. And the question for me is, what can be the philosophical basis of this kind of thinking? What can we learn from the community philosophy on the one hand, and what can be learned from the plants in order to understand the interconnected nature of human minds? And
László, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. We're still not seeing any movement on the screen. I'm not sure if that's a problem on our end or yours, but we're just seeing one slide of your presentation.
Only the one?
Yeah.
Oh, this was my question, that you cannot see. This is the main problem, that I am open this. It is sometimes it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I think it may help if you go into full screen and then just click us along.
I have another idea. We can check this too. You couldn't see my interesting pictures. Maybe in this way, can you see now the
yes, that's much better.
The movements.
Yes.
Yes, and these are the pictures about these many different things about the philosophy. Oh, wait, this doesn't work for me. Can you see now the pictures?
Yes, we are seeing them now.
These are the philosophical cafés.
Beautiful. Thank you.
That in public events, in public places, especially in public coffee houses and other places, even in some festivals. I will be very quick with these pictures, but you can get a general impression about that this is always a community event, community philosophy that is thinking together is a very important thing. And there are different kinds of people, if you like, with different backgrounds, older and younger people, and women and men and alike, and so on. And it was my point that this is the usual thing, and then I changed to this is a community psychiatry center, you can see. And this was my point, that the garden is the new cafe, vegetal metaphysics and community philosophy. This is a lecture which I delivered at this conference last year in Timișoara, Romania. This was the 17th International Conference on Philosophical Practice. and the article which is based on that presentation. And this is the community garden where I organize these garden philosophy events. You can see that this is a very typical thing. It is at the downtown Budapest, and there are, citizen gardeners who work on that independently or together on very small plots, right? Small gardens. They have different preferences about the chosen plants. For example, some people prefer flowers, other spicy plants, for example, and even larger plants. You can see these events, the pictures about the garden philosophy or philosophy of garden events with more and more people. And this is still continuing. This was my point. Okay, and the next point is that how the vegetal metaphysics or anti-metaphysics, to use Michael Marder's term, be relevant to understand and to create even a more non-violent way of thinking together. There are some points here coming from philosophy or these even the plant studies, the vegetal or plant turn. We can even talk about this turn in the attention from animals toward the plants or even fungi in the humanities, the so-called plant or critical plant studies, or the Planthropocene can be another interesting term here. The plant cognition, the growing interest of scholars, researchers, cognitive scientists, for example, in the lives and the words of plants, the plant cognition, communication, action, behavior, or even the consciousness of plants, the plant thinking, and even the phytocentrism, the vegetal anti-metaphysics, as I call this. I prefer, because I do not have a particular aversion toward metaphysics, I still prefer to talk about vegetal metaphysics. Of course, my point is that in some sense, plants live in a metaphysically different world, different from our world, right? In many interesting regards. So when I talk about metaphysics, I do not refer to the metaphysical thinkers, these very difficult philosophical works of, say, Immanuel Kant, for example, Aquinas, Saint Thomas de Aquinas, for example, or Spinoza or Heidegger. It is not about my concern. What I am referring to here is the metaphysical categories and concepts basically in the philosophy of biology. That is how we categorize the world. Its basic question for me is the individuality, the recurrent question of individuality in biology. So the question is that what is an individual? This is the main question. And what can be the basic, agent in development, the ontogenic and the evolutionary development, and what is an organism? Another interesting question, which is at the focus today again. Categories, individuality, the space-time limitations, the process metaphysics in relation to nature and the biological developments, the beginning and end of life, the birth, if you like, it's a strange term in the case of plants, of course, or the death, that's when the life begins, and what is the end of this life. Can be a question. This is a metaphysical question. That is, it is about the temporal identity of a particular living entity or an organism. The numerical identity can be similarly important metaphysical concern here. That is the topology, the temporal identity here, and the mereology, that is the part-whole relations in relation to plants again. This can be very, very complicated question, and this is still very important in biology to clarify these questions, or the growth, the change, the metamorphosis, more typical in the case of plants than in certain kinds of animals, mammalian species, for example, or actually decentralized organization. A plant is much more decentralized. This is one of the basic characteristics of plants, while we, for example, and like many animals, are much more centralized. The central nervous system is organizing and managing our life and behavior and thinking. What is an organism? Is the basic question, one of the basic questions of the philosophy of biology. The return of the organism quite recently in this professional literature can raise certain anomalies and interesting questions about clones, colonies, symbiosis, multi-species networks, and so on, especially in the case of plants and fungi and these relationships with each other. Even in philosophy, art, design, literature, and ethics and morality, including bioethics. Okay. What is the basic things or these insights about these different metaphysics? I would quote Merlin Sheldrake from Robert Macfarlane's famous book, The Underland, and it is based on an interview with Merlin Sheldrake. Very interesting. I think that this can be the summary of these questions about the different metaphysics of plants and, in this case, fungi. All taxonomies crumble, but fungi leave many of our fundamental categories in ruin. Fungi thwart our usual senses of what is whole and singular, or what defines an organism, and of what descent or inheritance means. They do strange things through time, because it is not easy to say where fungus ends or begins, when it is born or when it dies. To fungi, our world of light and air is their underland, into which they tentatively ascend here and there, now and then. So, what about philosophy? How can we use this kind of changing interest and related insights about the world of plants and fungi and this interconnected, entangled natural world in relation to philosophy? I show you some paintings. Different paintings, all of them are very interesting. So what is the common denominator? What do you think about that? All of these paintings have the same title. What is it? This is the philosopher. So my point is that in the public imagination and in the public culture, the basic representation, the most typical representation of the philosopher is that he or even she is a lone figure outside of the daily lives of the community or the society. So it's a very important thing. If you want to contemplate on the basic, most important things of the life and the world, you want to become a real sage, a wise person, you have to get out of this daily bustle of the city, for example, or to have to keep a distance from other people. And even there is this very characteristic and symbolic statue of Auguste Rodin, representing the thinker in the same way. However, and this is a very important thing, that when we take the history of philosophy, the Western philosophy, as an example, we should realize that the first great philosopher, Socrates, was very well-known citizen of the capital, the Athens. That is, he was an urban philosopher. And this is a very interesting point here, that while, according to this typical representation of the philosopher is a solitary, a lone person, a lone figure, which is this environment outside of the city center can provide the best environment to contemplate on the basic, or the most important questions of life and the world. So the philosophy, as we know it today, was born in the city center. This is my point. And there is a quotation from Karl Jaspers, the philosopher, according to which only as an individual can man become a philosopher. And this is the point. very strong claim, I think, which we have to question. So I don't agree with that. So this is the point. When we see the world of the plants, and for example, the garden or the forest or any natural ecosystem, we can see that this interconnectedness of living organisms, and so minds, be it anything, can be the real starting point to do philosophy in the modern world in a non-violent way. And this will be the basis of that. You can see Socrates here talking to people in the city center on the Agora. Yes, and I myself was interested in this city philosophy. That is this tradition of doing philosophy in public, the Agora, for example, in the case of ancient Athens, and then later in other places like the cafés or coffee houses in Europe, in London, Paris, Vienna, or even in Budapest. Budapest was part of this, and Budapest had a very, very characteristic coffee culture. Even in the 20th century. And urban philosophy, according to this idea, can be regarded as a legitimate way of philosophizing and philosophical life. And you can see the motto here from Socrates: I am a lover of learning, and trees and open country won't teach me anything, whereas men in the town do. So there is an opposition here, a supposed opposition between the city center, and the relatively large cities, and the nature, the natural environment, for example, the trees, and so the forests represented by the trees, or a garden in our case. And the point is that I disagree with this opposition, and there are some quotation from certain authors and from my article that the city or this garden is not. I cannot read this. These landscapes are neither urban nor rural, the community garden, but both a hybrid with horticultural production shaped by the particular fabric of the city. And there is this already mentioned quotation from the Phaedrus: I am a lover of learning, and trees and open country won't teach me anything, whereas men in the town do. And the last one is from I'm not seeing. Next time you walk through a forest, look down, the city lies under your feet. So my point is that there is not a huge gap or a basic difference and the opposition between the city and the city philosophy and this forest or garden-based thinking or lifestyle in general. So philosophy, what is philosophy? In this non-violent way. This will be the next question. What can we learn from plants again? The fundamental ethics of community philosophy. Ethics is sometimes and very often suggested. The fundamental ethics is just we have to listen to each other. Listening to each other can be a very basic moral imperative here. Accepting the other epistemically. This is the so-called epistemic justice, very popular term today, epistemic injustice and epistemic justice. And it is just enough. This would be the point. The question, true or false? I would say that it is false. I think that these ethics can be a necessary condition, but not a sufficient one here. Just the opposite. When I talk about the non-violent way, based on certain insights about the plant life or the world of the fungi or this forest and garden based lifestyle, is that this model is too oversimplified. It is not enough to just listen to each other, because this suggests a two-step process. And this is what I call as sharing knowledge. Sharing knowledge is a very important thing. But this is based on the assumption that the first stage of thinking should be private, that I am thinking about certain problems, certain philosophical or non-philosophical questions, right? And then I go public and I will talk about these questions with other people, right? And I will listen to their opinions and they will listen to my opinions. And this is what we typically call as a public or dialogic way of doing philosophy, for example, in this case. This can be about the public lecture. This can be even about the public, I don't know, philosophical conversations and so on. What I propose instead of these two stages model, that the thinking together, when it is from the very beginning, is basically public, that it is not just, it is based, the public side of that, the conversation would be based on certain private experiences, private thinking, private knowledge, private, I don't know, opinions and so on. But we, from the very beginning, as in a philosophical cafe or in this garden philosophy, think together. And this is a shared public community-based enterprise intellectual activity from the very beginning to the end. And this is my main suggestion. So what can we learn from plants? That this is a question. Plants are not so individualistic as animals, metaphysically and biologically. So not in a philosophical, I mean, not in a moral sense or not psychologically, but metaphysically not so individualistic. It's much more difficult to draw the boundaries between the single individuals. Questioning, so the individual autonomy, which is otherwise a very important thing to empower people to be autonomous and free and self-reflective. Can be one of the ultimate goals of philosophical practice. The different versions of that, even including the individual counseling, philosophical consultancy or counseling, and these group-based activities like the philosophical cafe or the garden philosophy. However, I think that the ultimate suggestion is that we can and should question at least or suspend this individual autonomy. That is deconstructing or dissolving individuality, melting into a larger whole, a larger community is what we should learn from plants and fungi. Relationships within and between species. So it is not just about a particular species, but about even in the multi-species world can we use the same principles. So this is a radical change. Radical, this term itself can be very strange here because plants, I would say, not really radical beings in some sense. However, to turn our attention toward plants can be a radical change, not just in our interest, not just in our scientific interest, I mean, but even in the practical experiences and the very practices as how we think philosophically, for example, with other people in a group or on the internet, for example, how these minds can be entangled and connected in a very essential way. There is a quotation, we will approaching to the end of my presentation, from Erich Fromm, from his influential book, To Have or To Be. This is unfortunately, is a very too long quotation, but very interesting. In contrast are those who approach a situation by preparing nothing in advance, not bolstering themselves up in any way. Instead, they respond, these people who don't want to, regard the knowledge as their own personal property, as something we have. So I have my feelings. I have my experiences, I have my opinions, that we have these opinions. So we have to think together with other people. So this presupposes that instead they respond spontaneously and productively. They forget about themselves, about the knowledge, the positions they have. Their egos do not stand in their own way. And it is precisely for this reason that they can fully respond to the other person and that person's ideas. They give birth to new ideas because they are not holding onto anything and can thus produce and give. While the having persons rely on what they have, even including the contents of the mind. The being persons rely on the fact that they are alive and that something new will born if only they have the courage to let go and to respond. And the last part of that, the dualist, thus the conversation ceases to be an exchange of commodities, information, knowledge, status, and becomes a dialogue in which it does not matter anymore who is right. This is the plant-like, non-violent way of conversation and doing philosophy in general. The dualists begin to dance together, and they part not with triumph or sorrow, which are equally sterile, but with joy. This is a very interesting quotation and thought from Erich Fromm, the famous psychoanalyst and the philosopher. Some other quotations to the end of this presentation from Glenn Albrecht, the Australian philosopher who coined this term symbiocene. The core message of the concept of the symbiocene is that life is interconnected and that the idea of autonomous individuals is mistaken. Again, very strong, even a very questionable assertion, but at the same time, this can be our message coming from the experiences with plants and the garden. Life is a collective enterprise, requiring collective and non-hierarchical forms of governance. And even Michael Marder mentioned this in this article from Phytocentrism to Come. Phytocentrism is a transhuman, vegetally inflected communism. I have some problems with this formulation because communism is not really a non-violent way of changing the world, but at the same time it is about to promote this kind of interconnectedness in the world in general and among people too. And there is an interesting point to the end about bioethics. It is a very interesting thing that Marder referred to the questions concerning the morality of even the abortion, for example. The phytocentric ethics of abortion would worry about the ecology of psychic, family, and social life against the backdrop of clashing or mutually reinforcing trajectories of growth that a pregnancy would, in each case, entail. So I think that we can learn many things from plants, not necessarily in a conscious way, even in relation to basic ethical, moral questions, including some bioethical ones, like the traditional question of the morality of abortion. And nature read in tooth and claw, we know this famous passage from Tennyson, and we can question this statement and to create a quite different, more cooperative picture of nature. And my point is that we can follow not Socrates or the Stoic philosophers, very popular today among some, say, people interested in philosophy or this philosophical life or philosophy as a way of life, but Epicurus, badly overshadowed. I will read a passage about this point from my article. There is a long tradition in practical philosophy organized around the garden. This is Epicurus' philosophical practice badly overshadowed today by the more fashionable Socratic and Stoic practices. I am not referring to Epicurus' famous statements about death, gods, the meaning of life, hedonism, atomism, soul, etc., but his very practice of living a philosophical life were in the garden. This was definitely a community living together with other people based on shared activities like conversations, dance, singing, eating, gardening. Epicurus thought in his garden, purposely avoiding the markets and low courts of the city. Business and politics, he knew, were not conducive to philosophical tranquility. In the garden, greed and love of power and domination were absent, and knowledge-seeking, friendship between equals, and moderate enjoyment gave daily life its shape, writes Catherine Wilson in her book, The Pleasure Principle. So I think that the garden, instead of the coffee house, can be even a better symbol and a good environment for this kind of shared community-based philosophical life. And there is a very important maxim to the end of that. Final passage. Garden philosophy offers a good opportunity to compare the two philosophical practices, the philosophical cafe and its garden-based counterpart, garden philosophy, as I call it. One of the differences is that the garden philosophy is more unpredictable, partly due to the weather. A philosophical cafe is unpredictable too. You cannot calculate in advance how many people and who will come, what will be the topic, how will the conversation develop, what the general atmosphere and mood will be like. Instead of being this uncertainty a kind of failing, the essential openness makes it a real intellectual adventure that is an active and creative way of exploring new paths of thinking. Like with the coffee, the garden is not only a good environment for a philosophical conversation, but provides a subtle historical, cultural, and philosophical context for community philosophy, a strong metaphor and symbol for the entanglement of minds, which itself is the goal of philosophical practice. By helping you to give up your rigid individuality, the garden offers a version of philosophy as a way of life. Follow the famous Epicurean maxim to live unnoticed, not in the sense that you are sentenced to helpless passivity, but that you will get empowered to actively participate in the community of your friends, even in a more than human world. What we begin to learn about the life and world of plants and the renewed interest in the philosophy of gardening, we start to imagine the nature of philosophy and its relation to the community, its diverse history, the many ways people try to do philosophy in different times and different cultures. The cafe is still very close to me, so the philosophical cafe. But my experimentations with philosophy, philosophical practice, and the philosophical life can be extended toward this new natural and social environment, the garden. To live unnoticed, this can be my main message, and this is our say small garden today just in front of me. Some pictures about that, and this small house at a lake are here. And my last point is that we organized a very interesting series of conversations, public conversations. We always invite two people with different backgrounds. And this time, tomorrow, I will be the moderator, and the topic will be artificial intelligence, anthropocentrism, and artificial intelligence from the perspective of the world of plants. Balázs Zsolnai, my friend, is the main organizer of these events. This will be the 13th one. So I am actually very interested in this question of how can we override this plant blindness in theory and in practice in general. So this was the presentation. I think that it was what it
Beautiful. Thank you so much, László. That was
improves.
really so informative, and the photos you showed were really
Yes.
lovely. That I wish we could all gather here with some food and coffee and do that today. But if anyone has any questions or comments that they'd like to share with László, please feel free to write them in the chat, or you can ask your own question. It looks like Mike has said deforestation due to logging seems very violent. Indigenous people were more connected to the forests than Europeans, hence less destructive. This is a moral, ethical issue. I'm not sure if there's anything.
Yes. Maybe who knows? Maybe we can learn certain things about the philosophical practices of these indigenous people. So we can even rely on a notion of indigenous philosophy, which can be part of that. But it was not my point, of course. I am talking about so mainly urban people who can think together. So in certain environments. But it is quite clear that this is an important thing, that the growing interest of indigenous knowledge can be a very good input to understand philosophical practice or the future fate of philosophy in general. But what can we do with philosophy? So there is in Hungary, for example, the decreasing interest in philosophy in general. So less and less young people want to join a philosophy department to study philosophy. And as I can tell it, this is the case in the United States too. So we have to rethink and to refresh philosophy. And these kind of community philosophy practices can be very helpful for that.
Beautiful. Ralph is wondering if you could say more about the ontology of organism.
Yes. I think that this was the point, that in evolutionary theory, the organism was underrepresented and undervalued. For example, what was the most important units and levels of the evolutionary process from the 1960s, 1970s? It was the gene, for example, in the work of, say, the famous Richard Dawkins, for example, the selfish gene, which was published in 1976, right? That book. And you know that it was the point that not the organism is the main agent in this process, but the gene. And there were some other leaders, some other thoughts about it, to talk about the superorganism, another super organistic level of the evolutionary process. Supra-individualism or supra-organistic and superorganistic levers seem to be more important. But no, there is a rediscovery of the organism as something which can be regarded as an independent unit of this process. So this is very difficult to say what can be the proper role of organism. But I quite recently published a paper with this title, that organism in bioethics. So it turned out to me too that the basic bioethical questions, the definition of death, for example, ethical problems of abortion, for example, the beginning and the end of life, and the metaphysics of pregnancy, a very interesting topic today, is all are based on this question about what is an organism anyway. This is a question, or this is a notion, a term, a technical term of theoretical biology, but it is still very difficult to define. Just check it. What is an organism? So, for example, is a virus an organism or not? This is still a question for these theoreticians. The usual answer is that it depends on how you use this term. What is your underlying theoretical context, and so on. So this will be I would say that the ontology of organism, that how can we individuate the organism, and how this can be much more difficult in the case of plants than in the case of especially mammalian species. An American author in an article says, actually more than one authors say that if you are curious about how many bisons are in a certain area, you are in an easy position. You just have to count them, right? It can be 18 or 134. There can be some anomaly. For example, a pregnant bison is one or two individuals or organisms. But in the case of a plant, of plants in general, plants, you are in a much more difficult position. So it is very difficult to draw the boundaries between the organisms. In the case of clones, for example, the strawberry can be a good example, dandelion, and these very, very complex systems of individuals or organisms, so it is very difficult to use this term in the case of plants, or not to mention the beginning and the end of the lives of these creatures.
Excellent. Thank you for your question, Ralph. Todd is wondering, are urban or community gardens themselves sites of violence insofar as they are sites in which plants are forced into productive relationship with humans, i.e. to serve human interests as objects of consumption? How do we grapple with that?
Oh, yeah, yes. Okay, it's here. Sites of violence. Yes, the green islands. Yes, maybe. Insofar as they are sites in which plants are forced into productive. Yeah, interesting point that maybe that is actually a very violent place, but at the same time, for an urban person, it can be, a very nice island to leave certain problems and something behind, and to meet not just plants and to work with the plants, but to meet other people and even to organize certain public events, say small festivals, philosophy. Talks and conversations, for example. And it is not really productive, I would think. If you want to buy tomato, for example, it is much better idea to go and you can buy them or any similar things, or even some spices. It is about the direct connection with plants, other animals, insects, for example. Even there are some birds and cats in these gardens, and not to mention the soil itself. To touch it, it is a phenomenological experience, which is, I think, missing from the lives of many people today. They feel this need that it is so it is a very strange thing. Why people actually pay for that and to work instead of just buying these vegetables from the market or from a superstore. Yes.
A supermarket, yes.
Supermarket, yes. Sorry.
Interesting. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Todd. Edward Casey is wondering, is there an analog to language among plants? And if not, what takes its place?
So I think that maybe this is a question about anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is not a crime or something, not a great guilt. I think that we should use in certain situations this anthropomorphic perspective. When we talk about the plant cognition, plant intelligence, even plant consciousness, I think that it is not necessarily just about the plants. It is about our concepts. How can we clarify these terms? What is intelligence, for example, in relation to artificial intelligence, for example? If you refer, what is an organism? When you use plants as examples, you can get closer to the understanding of not necessarily the terms in question, but the difficulties around them. So how difficult can be to define intelligence? Or what does it mean that we can talk about artificial intelligence in opposition to natural intelligence? So what does it mean that something is natural? It is more interesting for me, the first part of that. artificial versus natural. When we talk about natural intelligence, who knows, maybe not the human mind will be the next, the best example. But who knows, maybe the crickets, certain birds, and even the plants can provide us with a better starting point to think about the role of intelligence and the evolutionary origin and function of solving certain problems. What about the language? So maybe this is about the definition, of course, of language. Just sending certain signs, information, if you like, it's not probably enough to call this as language. So it's not my concern about that. I think that this is a strategy to say that plants are important morally and philosophically even because they are intelligent, they even conscious, and they can use certain kinds of language, even they talk to us and so on. An author make a distinction between these two positions, calling one is a plant advocacy, and the plant philosophy is the other one. Plant advocacy is based on this strategy, basically. I don't remember the name, but the book is Vegetal Sex, quite recently published book, Vegetal Sex, very interesting one. And there is this distinction in the book, plant advocacy, that is the usual thing that plants are very similar to us, so we have to protect them and we have to take them seriously. And the proper sense of the plant philosophy would be when we can overcome this kind of inclination to anthropomorphize the world and to see the real, very, I would say, radical differences between the plant cognition, plant lives, and the lives of the animals, including us.
Beautiful, thank you. And Todd is wondering, following on Edward's point, how are those plant voices invited into the dialogue in the philosophical garden?
No way, it was not my point. And this is a very important thing to emphasize or to clarify this, that I was not talking about plants as such. I think that in our practice, we should follow the model or this example of the plants to give up the individuality, to melt into a larger community and accept this, that we are not an owner of our thoughts, but we just think together with other people. So this was my point. It is not just about that, for example, we would go to the philosophy, the garden philosophy, to talk about plant intelligence, and we would invite some scholars who makes research on these topics or something like that. We don't want to learn anything about the plants. We have to, this is the point, that we try to follow the examples of plants. But who knows, maybe we are surrounded with the plants and they, in some sense, or any form, they can contribute to the conversations. This is a multi-species conversation, I would say. And even the presence, when you want to communicate with plants, it is not necessarily by language. For example, to take care of a plant, there is one here, for example. I take care of the plant, and this is a kind of intersubjective or I don't know, something relations, taking care. And I will be careful, and I will be sensitive to the needs of the plant. So this is the basic thing of the communication, I would say. And this is always not just about the plant again. When I talk about the garden is a multi-species community and designed by and managed in certain sense by people. But it is unpredictable. You cannot really control your garden. That this is the first lesson you will learn as a gardener, as a newcomer, as an amateur gardener. that you cannot so predict what will happen.
Excellent, thank you.
What kind of plants you will buy next day? Maybe. That is always a chaotic thing. This chaos is an adventure. This is my central term. I always call these events and these conversations and intellectual adventures. And the gardening is an adventure. You cannot predict anything, but it is very exciting to see this unpredictable nature of things. You cannot prepare yourself with already made, already created answers to the questions. When you go to the presentation or something, to a class at the university, so this is different. You don't know what will be the topic. This is an important thing for me. We choose the topic right before the conversation. Just suggest one. For example, say, could you mention very quickly a good topic for a conversation in the garden?
Education.
Education. Yes, very nice.
Schools and education.
Yeah, education, for example. Honesty was my idea. And just we have, say, 1.5 hours for that. In a coffee house or in the garden. Garden is much better for certain reasons, but this provides the same very non-violent and but at the same time an environment within which the debates are welcome. So you don't have to be always too shy or something about that, your opinion. You have to be assertive about your thoughts, because we think together. It is not about attacking the other member of the community.
Thank you for your question, Todd. And Gay was wondering, if you're speaking about deconstructing individualism, then at the same time, doesn't this include the deconstruction of speciesism? And as you point out, on the embrace of philosophical life, which does not assume the certainty of human knowledge.
Speciesism. So I think that these experiences coming from these multi-species community conversations can alleviate the problems of speciesism in the original sense. I myself think that the world of plants, and so the fungi or bacteria and other non-animal creatures can question the very notion of the species too. So it's much more difficult to separate the species and to say that the species is a real natural category. And especially in the future, who knows, maybe this will be much more difficult. So I was interested in philosophy of biology and saw the species problem, and this was one of the first basic questions of this area, to try to define precisely the different meanings of species. And so when we talk about speciesism, which is an ethical category or ethical term, I think that if we experience, not just learn about, but we experience this close interconnectedness of the various members of the ecosystem, including a garden, we will be ready to give up our speciesist tendencies or inclinations. Maybe.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, László, and everybody for your questions. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add or ask before we wrap up for today?
Yes, thank you very much for the attention and the comments, questions.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for being here. It's been really a treat to hear everything that you've shared with us and hear about your great organizations going on. Our next speaker in the series will be 2 weeks from today on Friday, May 24th, and it will be 1 hour later than usual. So our next meeting is on May 24th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, not 10 a.m. And we'll send out a reminder in a couple weeks, but we will be joined by Will Tuttle, the author of the international bestseller, The World Peace Diet, as well as several other books on spirituality, intuition, and social justice. As always, if you enjoy Living One and feel called to support Kerulos, Living One, and all of our sanctuary residents, please consider donating at the link on our website, kerulos.org. Once again, thank you, everyone, and thank you, László, for sharing your time with us. We're really glad that you're here and enjoy spending this time together, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
László, I wanted to say you had some fellow or philosophy professors engaged here, so you weren't alone.
Yes. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.